Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this webinar on community justice solutions. In the next 2 hours, we're going to explore how community justice mechanisms are a response to what I sometimes call the 50% justice challenge. And with that, I mean that in virtually every country on the planet, only around 50% of the people who have a justice problem get a solution. The other 50% got a solution that doesn't help them, or is still waiting for one, or has given up, or is not even trying. We have an impressive group of speakers, and I will start by setting the stage. Margaret Satterthwaite, the UN Special Rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers, whose thorough report from last year on community justice inspired us to hold this webinar. She will start. And she'll be followed by Tatiana Teplova, head of the Division Policy Coherence for the Sustainable Development Goals at the OECD. Tatiana is one of the key drivers behind the movement towards people-centered justice programming, which most recently includes an official OECD recommendation to the member states on how to actually implement it and do it. We then continue with two panels. The first panel asks what judiciaries and ministries need to scale community justice. And we're very honored to have the Deputy Minister of Justice Promotion from Colombia, Johanna Alejandra Delgado Gaitan, who will share the experience from her country. Two experts from the judiciary will reflect on this. First, Justice Joel Ngugi from Kenya, who leads the alternative justice system effort in Kenya, and Justice Ogunfowara from Ogun State High Court in Nigeria, who's been at the forefront of exploring evidence-based pathways to improve the resolution of common legal problems. The second panel, following that, brings together two practitioners from the forefront of community justice mechanisms, working in Kenya and in Ethiopia. Annette Mbogo, Executive Director of Kituo wa Sharia, and Milky Mekura from Ethiopia, a researcher at the Oromia Legal Training and Research Institute and a former judge. Thank you, all these amazing speakers, for being with us today. Now, my friends, 2 weeks ago, I was present at the Commonwealth Law Ministers meeting, which is held every 2 years. And this time it was held in Zanzibar. I was there together with my colleague, Teresa Spout, and we facilitated a session on people-centered justice programming with the ministers and attorneys general who were present. The session was held under Chatham House rules, so I'll not go into detail, but I will share three things. First, just like now, we threw the 50% justice challenge on the table. We said only around 50% of the people in your country who have a justice problem get a solution. And I can truly say that this was not seen as controversial and was accepted by almost everyone. Second, there was a general sense that the best response to the challenge was not more judges and lawyers or more courts and law firms. They have a critical role, but there is also a need for justice delivery mechanisms that are simpler, closer to the people, and the problems that they have that are less complex and faster in producing outcomes. In other words, community justice mechanisms. Third, initiatives were being deployed in almost every country, and that was really impressive, under different names, with slightly different formats, but almost all unequivocally falling under the broader heading of community justice solutions. The big challenge regarding these initiatives, with only one or two exceptions, were three. One, the challenge of scale and integrating them optimally with the justice system. Second, the challenge of funding them sustainably. And thirdly, the challenge to ensure they continue to operate at a good quality standard, and that somehow that quality is enforced or looked at. So simply put, there is full recognition of the challenge. There is wide acceptance of the direction for change. And there is a good sense of what is needed to deploy the change widely. So we would say, and this webinar is part of that, let's get cracking to find ways to deploy high quality, well-funded, scalable, integrated community justice mechanisms widely. Let us understand the challenges so that we can create opportunities. With that, it is now my great pleasure to give the floor to the UN Special Rapporteur on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers, Margaret Satterthwaite. Meg, can I give you the floor?
Thank you so much, Sam, and it's a real pleasure to be with you here today. And I'd like to thank you, HiiL, for putting together this webinar. Your Excellency, Justices, colleagues, I'm honored to be speaking with you today. It's been a year and a half since I took up the mandate as UN Special Rapporteur on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers. In the last months, I've seen both the worst and the best of the world's legal systems. I've raised the alarm when judges and lawyers face dismissal, detention, and even execution in reprisal for their work to protect justice in the face of powerful forces committing abusive acts. And I've spoken out when community justice workers, paralegals, navigators, jailhouse lawyers face reprisal for their work. Judges, lawyers, and paralegals play a vital role in upholding the rule of law and protecting human rights. Their work is essential to public confidence in the administration of justice and to ensuring that everyone has access to justice. States must take all necessary measures to ensure that judges and lawyers can play their essential role. But data shows us that formal legal systems alone can't fill people's justice needs. Human rights law guarantees access to independent and impartial legal systems that fulfill people's justice needs. But if legal systems are ineffective at checking abuses and solving problems, if people can't access legal institutions equally, and if communities are disenfranchised or left feeling alienated, these systems are failing. Colleagues, you will be aware that an estimated 5.1 billion people, 2/3 of the Earth's population, lack meaningful access to justice. This includes people who can't obtain justice for everyday problems, people who are excluded from the opportunity the law provides, and people who live in extreme conditions of injustice. Behind this statistic are lives lost, dreams crushed, and conflicts sparked. I've seen these problems firsthand. At the outset of my career, some decades ago, I had the great fortune to work for the Truth and Justice Commission in Haiti. There, I worked with Haitian lawyers and justice workers to document the terrible abuses that everyday Haitians experienced at the hands of the military regime. People walked for hours and even slept overnight waiting to meet with us. We heard about the worst forms of abuse visited on people who stood up for democracy. But what changed my life forever were the parts of the story that were outside our mandate. Stories about the need for potable water when the village pump was broken. The kids who were left out without education when they couldn't register for school because they didn't have a birth certificate. Those stories were not written into the final report of the Truth Commission. I realized then that the quest for human rights must start in those spaces where human potential is crushed by daily injustice. In many places, for example, undocumented workers can't access remedies when they're not paid. In rural areas, pregnant women die when their local health center is out of materials needed for an emergency blood transfusion. In indigenous territories, communities are forced to abandon water sources when companies mining on their lands leave toxic waste that seeps into the water. In cities, families face choices about whether to offer their children 2 or 3 meals a day because they must save money for rent or face eviction. Sometimes laws exist to prevent and remedy these problems, but affected people may be unaware of those laws or unable to access or afford the support they need to make use of them. In other cases, laws may not yet exist to help people impacted by emerging issues, like the environmental and humanitarian devastation wrought by climate change. Importantly, there are not enough lawyers and judges to close this justice gap. The good news, though, is that there's a different way of doing things. A growing number of UN member states, civil society organizations, and researchers agree that the solutions to these problems should be identified from the perspective of those seeking resolution to their justice problems. These people-centered justice approaches respond to the enormity and urgency of the gap between rights and reality. They acknowledge that tinkering around the edges or doubling down on doing things the way we have always done them will not ensure access to justice for all. By placing people and communities at the heart of the debate and enhancing their ability to make their voices heard, people-centered justice approaches also respect the inherent dignity of all members of the human family, as recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and set out as a foundational tenet of the UN human rights system. One type of people-centered justice approach, legal empowerment, offers particular promise. Legal empowerment entails putting the power of the law into people's hands by supporting their ability to know, use, and shape the law. Evidence and experience drawn from legal empowerment efforts around the world demonstrates that legal empowerment approaches can expand access to justice in a rapid, relatively inexpensive, and concrete way. And we will be hearing more about these strategies today. My report on legal empowerment submitted to the General Assembly briefly describes the extent to which justice systems are failing to meet people's needs, defines legal empowerment, provides examples of legal empowerment approaches, identifies challenges to advancing legal empowerment, and makes recommendations about how states, lawyers, bar associations, communities, and other actors can use legal empowerment approaches to close the justice gap. The need is urgent, but legal empowerment can drive progress across the Sustainable Development Goals, especially on Target 16.3, by which states agreed to, quote, promote the rule of law at the national and international levels and ensure equal access to justice for all. In my report, I point to a number of good practices. I'll emphasize just one here today. I call for an expanded legal ecosystem through the embrace of community justice workers. Variously called community paralegals, justice defenders, grassroots legal advocates, or barefoot lawyers, these community justice workers are generally not university graduates with professional degrees in law, nor are they accredited members of the bar like lawyers. Instead, they typically receive more limited training from civil society organizations and lawyers, training academies, or sometimes government ministries in specific areas of law and in skills like negotiation, community organizing and advocacy, as well as the workings of relevant justice or sectoral institutions. Once trained, they raise awareness of rights, laws, and policies, help people navigate the legal and administrative processes they need to travel to pursue remedies, and support communities' engagement in law and policy reform. They're often members of and live within the communities they serve, while some work in mobile clinics or relocate to be close to communities facing injustice. A comparison is often helpfully drawn between community justice workers and nurses or community health workers. Like these professionals, community justice workers act as force multipliers, extending legal first aid to marginalized, isolated, or excluded communities. These justice defenders bring special expertise, such as indigenous knowledge or problem-solving methods derived from custom and innovation alike. They expand options for those who face legal problems and refer people to lawyers when technical expertise is needed. And through their work with individual and community issues, they learn where legal systems are weak or broken and can suggest solutions designed from the bottom up. In short, community justice workers help democratize the rule of law. In my report, I point to a number of obstacles facing community justice workers. which, as with lawyers, sadly includes physical attacks, online attacks, and smear campaigns against community paralegals. But most importantly today, I want to emphasize that in many countries, community justice workers operate under threat of criminalization for dispensing advice or conducting other legal empowerment activities that are sometimes deemed to amount to the unauthorized practice of law. In my report, I call for states to work with bar associations to decriminalize the provision of legal assistance by trained community workers. There are various approaches to ensuring that community justice workers provide quality services based on appropriate knowledge and skills, and that qualified operators can be identified by consumers. Regulation should be directed to ensuring that those who need legal support can obtain quality assistance by distinguishing among the services providers are equipped to offer, while enlarging the ecosystem of those able to offer services and making services accessible. A few additional recommendations I make are states should focus energy and resources on transforming systems that perpetuate injustice, that justice solutions should be led by and built upon the knowledge of affected communities. These communities are justice experts by expertise, by necessity, and states can learn a lot by listening to them. And finally, I will make a recommendation, which is that bar associations and associations of judges embrace this opportunity. Perhaps the most important is that justice solutions should be led by those communities. Lawyers should support as allies to community justice workers, opening doors and providing expert support when needed. And judges should welcome community justice workers into the system, recognizing their crucial work to ensure people do not need to walk alone on the path to justice. And I'm thrilled that today we'll be hearing from some of these very lawyers, community justice workers, and happily judges. This is why I'm especially excited to be here today to hear about this groundbreaking work. I offer my humble gratitude to the leaders we'll hear from today. And in conclusion, I hope that my report will serve as a resource for states and justice system workers in their work to expand access to justice for all. Together, we truly can catalyze serious efforts to achieve justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meg, for pointing out, first of all, the critical importance in daily lives of closing the justice gap, how livelihoods literally often depend on it, the ability of people to invoke the law, but also interesting how community justice actually democratizes and becomes like an improvement engine for justice systems. Expanding the legal ecosystem, let's hold on to that thought as we move forward. It is now my great pleasure to give the floor to you, Tatiana, from the OECD. If anyone has unrelentlessly worked to make people-centered justice practical and understandable for governments, it's you and your team. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sam, for the kind words and, of course, for inviting the OECD to join this important conversation. Your Excellencies, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, it really is indeed a great pleasure for me and for the OECD to be part of this event. And as many of you know, promoting a justice system that embodies both equity and accessibility is an important OECD priority. We argue that the paradigm of people-centered justice represents a profound shift in perspective, moving away from a system designed around institutional needs to the one that prioritizes the needs of individuals at its core. Importantly, this approach doesn't disregard the diversity which is inherent in legal and institutional structures globally, but in fact rather embraces it by democratizing access to justice, making it a concrete reality for every individual, business, and community. And in this context, and as was already mentioned by Sam, I'm particularly proud that the OECD Council has recently adopted a new OECD legal instrument, what we call the OECD Recommendation on Access to Justice and People-Centered Justice Systems, which is designed to help countries to act as a strategic framework to kind of dedicated to bridge the justice gap, but also help achieve justice for all. This instrument advocates for a transformative shift in the orientation of justice systems towards the needs, but also lived experiences of the communities that they are intended to serve. And this, in fact, requires a full spectrum of services from courts and lawyers, as was already mentioned by Margaret, but then, of course, to legal assistance and community justice. And indeed, we at the OECD strongly believe that community justice initiatives embody the people-centered justice vision, demonstrated that when justice is rooted in the community, it not only closes the justice gap, but also strengthens the social fabric, fosters trust in institutions, and also contributes to the overall well-being of society. So now let me take a step back and briefly mention several key elements which are essential to people-centered justice vision underlined by the OECD recommendation. So first is accessibility and quality of legal services to ensure that they are available to all, particularly to those representing underserved and marginalized communities. And here, this is really about breaking down the barriers, geographical, financial, linguistic, and cultural, and to make justice truly accessible to everyone. Next is people-centered design and delivery of justice services, which really requires placing the needs of the people at the heart of a service design. And of course, first of all, this involves the understanding of the legal needs of communities, and then designing services taken into account this input. Next, the recommendation also emphasizes the importance of building effective governance structures that support collaboration across various sectors and levels of government alongside community organizations and civil society. And such structures, for example, can enable the integration of community justice initiatives into the broader justice system. And I'm really pleased to be part of this event where we have also the Ministries of Justice judges to reflect on how to integrate and embed community justice initiatives into the broader justice systems, also to ensure that they are supported, sustainable, and scalable. So this is a really important point. Next aspect to highlight is empowerment and participation. This was already mentioned by Margaret, but just to flag that the OECD recommendation also recognizes that communities and individuals should play an active role in shaping their justice systems. This means creating opportunities for meaningful participation in the design, implementation, and evaluation of justice initiatives, thereby ensuring that these initiatives remain grounded in the needs and priorities of the communities that they serve. And finally, the recommendation encourages innovation in the delivery of justice services, such as, again, community justice solutions and initiatives, including those leveraging technology, leveraging data, and other various mechanisms to enhance access and effectiveness. And here, again, the spirit of the recommendation is to ensure that all of the justice services, particularly that these innovations at the community level, are scalable, so that to enable the expansion of the successful models and the adaptation to different contexts and communities. And again, here we see that community justice emerges as an important and promising game changer, which is fully aligned with the recommendations focus on making justice systems more responsive, more accessible, and more tailored to the needs of different communities. I'm likely running out of time, so just to mention a few promising examples of community justice. I know that there will be fantastic speakers after me talking about their experiences, but just to briefly highlight here the restorative justice programs, which, for example, focus on rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. And one example is the New Zealand's Rangatahi courts that are aiming to incorporate the different cultural processes of Maori and Islander people into the youth justice people. And what was interesting about this particular initiative is that it has not only led to meaningful outcomes for young offenders and their communities, but also in fact demonstrated a reduction in rates of recidivism. So there is actually a strong track record of improving overall outcomes of the justice system. And another brief example is community legal clinics. Many of you again know about them. And as Sam mentioned in his introductory remarks, that nearly every country has some form of these initiatives. But again, we do see this as a critical access point for legal services, particularly for those representing marginalized and underserved groups. What the example that comes to mind is the Canadian network of community legal clinics, which provides both legal assistance and legal advice, but then also engages in legal education, advocacy, and law reform, hence helping to address not only individual legal needs, but also systemic issues affecting entire communities. So here I just would like to conclude by saying that these examples highlights the diverse and innovative ways in which community justice initiatives can, but also we would argue should be implemented to help close the justice gap and deliver people-centered justice. And I'd like to emphasize that this will require a collaborative effort from governments, civil society, the private sector, and international organizations. So with this, I'd like to thank you again for your attention, for inviting us to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to hearing from the panelists about the successful examples and how to actually make it happen at scale. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. And let me again stress the immense value of that OECD recommendation. If you want to bring something good, practical, usable to the attention of your boss, the minister or the Chief Justice, bring them this one. Making things accessible, putting people at the core, thinking about the governance, ensuring empowerment and participation, and last but not least, the importance of innovation and looking at scalable innovations because it is needed. Thank you. Well, with that, we now have laid the groundwork. We know what the problem is. We know in which directions solutions lie. So we would now like to turn to the first panel. What do judiciaries and ministries of justice need to actually scale community justice solutions? And the core questions that we're looking at is the challenge of scale, the challenge of sustainable funding, the challenge of making sure that the services are of good quality, and the integration into the overall system. We are very honored to have the Deputy Minister of Justice from Colombia, Joana Alejandra Delgado Gaitan, with us to share the experience of Colombia, which has been a trailblazer in many areas. With that, Your Excellency, very honored to have you, and I would like to give you the floor.
Muy buenos días, Sam. Gracias.
Good morning,
para mí personalmente, pero para el
Sam.
gobierno de Colombia.
For me
Es
personally,
un
but
honor
also for the
estar
Colombian
invitada
government, it
a
is an honor
ese
to be invited to this
espacio de trabajo, no
uh,
solamente
work
para mirar
workspace,
experiencias,
not only
sino
to
también
look
para
at the
aprender de
experiences, but
las
also to
experiencias.
learn
He
from
escuchado
those experiences.
a
I
Margaret
have
y a Tatiana
listened to Margaret
y me
and
agrada
Tatiana,
mucho ver que
and I'm
estamos en la
very
misma línea.
happy to see that we're
El
on the
reto de la
on the
justicia
same line.
comunitaria
The
es
challenge of
importante
community justice,
para la
it's a very important
construcción
one
de lo que decía
for
Tatiana hace un
the
momento,
building
de la
of what
justicia centrada en las
Tatiana mentioned
personas.
just now,
Para el
which is
gobierno
justice
nacional, esa ha
it's
sido
centered
una
on
apuesta
people, or
fundamental.
for the
Desde que
Colombian
llegamos
government, this has been
al
a
gobierno
critical
nacional,
bet.
hemos estado
Since we got
enfocados en
to
una
office,
justicia
we have
centrada en
focused
las
on
personas, en los
justice that's
territorios
centered
y en las
on people,
colectividades.
territories,
Porque
and
cada una
the
de estas
collectives, because
formas de
each one
acceder
of
a la
those
justicia
ways of
permite efectivamente
having
que los
access to
diferentes
justice
actores
allows
sociales
for the different
puedan
social stakeholders
realmente ver
to
satisfechas sus necesidades
actually
básicas
see their
y
basic needs
establecer
being
también
satisfied
entornos protectores.
and to
Entonces,
create
frente a esto,
protecting
lo que pasa es que el tiempo
environments.
es muy breve,
Uh, uh,
pero
I
en
know I
estos
don't
10
have a
minutos
lot
yo
of time,
quisiera
but in
hablarles
this
de
10
tres
minutes, I would like
experiencias
to talk to
específicas
you
que
about
estamos
3
llevando a cabo
specific
en
experiences
Colombia.
that
La
are
primera
taking place here in
es la
Colombia. The
creación
first
de
one
sistemas locales
is
de
the
justicia.
creation of
¿Cómo
local
operan los
justice
sistemas
models.
locales de
How
justicia?
do these
La
local justice models operate?
institucionalidad, la sociedad civil,
Institutions,
pero también
civil
las
society,
organizaciones
but also
cívicas, sociales y culturales se reúnen en un
civil,
comité y
cultural
entre ellas definen cuáles
organizations
son,
meet
primero,
in a
sus
committee,
niveles de
and among them
conflictividad.
they define,
Después de
first of all,
revisar los
what are
niveles de
their levels of
conflictividad, se
conflict.
llega a diferentes
After
formas de
looking at those,
actuación
they
dentro de
reach
ese grupo
different
específico,
ways
en
of
un
acting
territorio específico,
inside or
y se
within
crean unos
those specific
manuales
groups,
o
those specific
protocolos o
territories, and they
lineamientos,
come up
podríamos
with some
llamarlos así,
manuals,
a través de los
protocols, or
cuales esa
guidelines,
comunidad
we could say,
entiende cuáles son las formas
through
en las
which those
cuales puede
communities
resolver
understand
conflictos.
what are the ways in
Es
which they can
importante que no solo
solve
la
their conflicts.
institucionalidad se
It
encuentre
is important
presente,
not
es
only for
decir, llega el
institutions to be
Ministerio de
present,
Justicia,
meaning
organiza
the
las mesas de
Ministry of
conflictividad,
Justice,
pero lo primero que
organizing
hacemos
this
al llegar al territorio
conflict
es
roundtables, but
involucrarnos con el
the first
grupo que
thing
se
that we do
encuentra
when we
allí
get to
para
those
que sea el
regions
mismo
is
grupo
to
el que nos diga cuál es el
get involved
análisis,
with the
cuál es el
groups there
diagnóstico
for
y
them to
frente a ese
tell us what
diagnóstico
are their
nosotros desde la
assessments,
institucionalidad podemos
and with
articular
those
formas
assessments
de
are
respuesta, ya
us from the
sean a través de
institutions, we can
nuestras
articulate
formas de
ways
justicia
of
ordinaria, por llamarlas de
responding
alguna
to that,
manera,
whether
pero
it's
lo
through
más
the
importante es que
ordinary
ahí siempre
system, so to speak.
crecen y
But the
surgen
most important
formas
thing is that
comunitarias de
from there,
organización
we
de
always
esos
get
mismos grupos humanos
community
que lo
ways of
único que buscan es un
organization from
lineamiento
those human
claro
groups
para
that
entender cómo
are
resolver sus
looking for
diferencias.
clear guidelines on how to
Nosotros
solve their
tenemos
differences.
un apoyo constante.
We have
Estamos
constant
trabajando
support.
no solamente en ese grupo y en esa
We're
forma a
working
través de la
not
cual
only
el sistema
in
local
those
se
groups
crea,
and in
sino que
that way
además nos
through
apoyamos
which the
también con
local
las
systems are
universidades
created,
para que
but
las
we also get
universidades
support
a
from
través
universities,
de los programas de derecho especialmente,
so that
lo ideal sería
universities,
que tuviéramos un
through
grupo más
law
interdisciplinario, pero
programs
por ahora con
specifically,
los programas
ideally,
de
we would
derecho
have more
vamos a través de
interdisciplinary
consultorios
groups, but for now,
jurídicos móviles.
with law
Entonces, no solamente
faculties,
la
we go
respuesta de la
through
justicia local,
mobile
sino también el
legal
apoyo
advisory
institucional
and provide
lleva a que si
assistance not
por
only
alguna
to
circunstancia
local
no se
justice,
puede resolver
but
dentro de esa
if
forma
we
específica
cannot
comunitaria
solve
de
a
asociación y de
circumstance
respuesta,
through
pues
this
inmediatamente
community
tiene
way,
usted la alternativa
you will
para poder
immediately
acudir
have
de una
the
manera
alternative of
clara, pronta y segura frente
getting
al sistema
access
ordinario de justicia.
in a
Ese
thorough
ha
and fast way to
sido
the
además
ordinary
una bandera, no
legal
es una
justice.
bandera específica
This has been
nuestra.
a
Esto fue un
flagship,
trabajo
and
que se
it's not
inició
only our own, this is a
en
work
los
that started
primeros años con la cooperación internacional.
with
USAID fue muy
international
importante en
cooperation.
todo lo que fue el proceso
USAID
de
was very
formación al
important
interior de las
in the
capacidades
creation
técnicas del ministerio.
of
Y
the
ahora lo que
technical
estamos haciendo es ir a los territorios
capabilities of the
más
ministry. And what we're doing right
apartados,
now is
la
to
sociedad
travel
rural
to the
dispersa que en
most
Colombia es tan
distant
amplia
reaches,
y que
the rural
impide
society that
desafortunadamente
it's
a las
so
personas tener un acceso
large in Colombia,
efectivo, eficiente y
and that
seguro de
unfortunately
frente a la
don't have
justicia.
an
Ese
effective
sería
and
mi
safe
primer ejemplo.
access to justice.
El
That would be
segundo
my first
caso que
example. The
quisiera también
second one
compartir
that I would
con
like to
ustedes y
share
que me
with you,
parece una
and that I
apuesta
believe
importante,
it's a
es el
very important one,
reconocimiento de las justicias propias.
is the
Como ustedes
recognition
saben, desde la
of
Constitución de
the
1991, en Colombia se
justice
reconoce el
of
pluralismo
the
jurídico.
community justice
Tenemos
systems. As you know, with
muchos
the
grupos
1991
humanos, pueblos
Constitution of
indígenas,
Colombia, we
comunidades
recognize
negras,
ethnic pluralism.
afropalenqueros,
We have indigenous
raizales,
communities,
comunidades gitanas,
raizales,
todas habitan dentro de
Afro-Colombian
nuestro
communities,
territorio. Y
Roma
lo que hemos
communities.
hecho desde
They
siempre,
all
desde el punto
inhabit
de
our
vista
territories.
occidental, es
And what we've
intentar que
always
esos
done
grupos
from the
humanos
Western point of view is
vengan
to
y
try
entiendan
for
cómo
those human
nosotros
groups to
hacemos la
come and
justicia.
understand
Eso no está
how
funcionando.
we do
Llevamos
justice, and
34
that
años en una lucha
hasn't worked. We have
que al
been
final nos lleva a unos deterioros
working for
muy
34
grandes,
years and
especialmente para las
struggling
poblaciones más
in a
vulnerables
way
y en
that
los
really
territorios más afectados.
deteriorates
Entonces, la
access for
apuesta
these very vulnerable
importantísima
populations
en el
from distant territories.
fortalecimiento de estos
So we're
sistemas de
really betting
justicia
on
propia
strengthening
es,
this
primero, entenderlos,
justice
conocerlos,
systems of
poder
the
establecer
communities. We
líneas
need to
claras, porque
understand them,
ciertamente,
to recognize them,
sobre
to
todo para nosotros
establish
los abogados, y
clear
eso hay que
lines, because
reconocerlo, es un sesgo muy
for us
difícil
lawyers,
ver
that's
el mundo de una forma
a
mucho
very
más
big
transversal.
bias, and it's
Pero esa es la lucha y
hard to
esa
look
es la
at the
apuesta
world in a
a
more
través de la cual estos
horizontal way.
ejercicios naturales desde el
But
territorio nos
that's why we
permiten
need to look at these
establecer
regions,
claramente
and that's
este
how we'll
tipo de
be able
respuestas
to
efectivas.
establish these types of
Y además,
effective
como
responses.
anotaba creo que Tatiana hace un minuto,
And also, as
esas
Tatiana
respuestas
mentioned
nacen de esas
just
mismas
now, those
comunidades. Y
responses come
nosotros,
from these
efectivamente, desde la justicia
communities
ordinaria, lo único que
and
hacemos
from the
es buscar
ordinary
esos
justice.
mecanismos de
All that
articulación.
we do is to look for these
En esto quiero también
coordination
contarles
mechanisms.
un
Here, I
orgullo
would
que
like to
tenemos en este momento.
tell you
La
something
Constitución
that
del
makes us really
91
proud,
creó
and it's that the Constitution of
la
1991
Jurisdicción Especial Indígena
created the special
y
indigenous
dijo
jurisdiction,
claramente en su artículo
and said very
286
clearly
que
in its
tenía que
286
buscarse un
article
mecanismo de
that
articulación
we needed
entre
to
la
look for
jurisdicción ordinaria y la
articulation or
jurisdicción propia,
coordination
la
mechanism
jurisdicción
between the
indígena.
ordinary
Sin
and the
embargo,
indigenous
eso fue en
jurisdictions.
1991 y
However,
hasta
this
este
happened back in
gobierno
1991,
hemos
and it was
logrado
only until this
finalmente
administration
realizar la consulta previa a los
that we were able to bring
116
the
pueblos indígenas que se
previous
sientan
consultation
en nuestra
to the
mesa ampliada
116
de
indigenous
pueblos
peoples
indígenas y
that
comunidades
sit
étnicas,
down in
y
our
allí este
round
año
table
será
of
la primera
indigenous
vez
and
que
ethnic
tanto el Poder
communities.
Judicial y la
And
rama
this year
ejecutiva hemos
will be
logrado
will
diseñar un
mark the
mecanismo.
first time in
Quizá no
which
sea el
the
mecanismo perfecto, quizá no sea el mejor,
judiciary
pero por lo
and
menos
indigenous
nos
authorities
pusimos de
have designed a
acuerdo en lo
mechanism. Maybe
fundamental,
it's not the
en
best one,
cómo los pueblos
but at least
indígenas ven
we
sus
have
sistemas de
agreed
justicia
on
propia
the
y cómo esos sistemas
fundamentals
de
on
justicia
how
propia
the
pueden
indigenous peoples
incluso
look at
llevarnos
their
a
own
nosotros
justice
desde la
systems and
jurisdicción
how these
ordinaria
systems
a
can
avanzar
bring
de
us
una
at the
manera mucho
ordinary
más
jurisdiction
eficiente.
to
Aquí hay prácticas
make progress in
importantísimas
a
que
more
vemos y
efficient
que
way.
yo
There are
creo y
some
espero y
very
confío
important
que la
practices that I hope
legislación y el gobierno en general
Colombian
puedan traer
law and the
también
government
para la justicia ordinaria, porque son
will
esas
bring
dinámicas
to the
comunitarias y
ordinary justice
colectivas
system, because
que
this
llevan en esta visión de
community
los
and
pueblos
collective
indígenas a la
dynamics
armonía,
that
a
involve
buscar
are
que
the
a
ones that
través de
bring harmony to the
diferentes
indigenous peoples
mecanismos y situaciones no
through
solamente se
different
restablezca el
mechanisms,
principio de legalidad, sino
but
que
not only
además se
reestablishing
restablezca la
the
armonía con el
principle
pueblo, con
of
la
law or
colectividad
the
y
rule
con
of
el
law,
entorno.
but also reestablishes
Entonces,
the
para nosotros,
harmony
esta
with the
experiencia es
people, the
pues
community, and
de
their
gran
surroundings.
valor.
So
El
for
poder
us, this
llevar
experience
ahorita,
is one of
el
great
20 de
value.
julio de este año, llevaremos esa
On
ley
July
de
20th,
articulación y
we will
estamos
bring
seguros
this law, this
que así
coordination
no
law, before
solamente
Congress,
cumplimos
and
con las
we're
necesidades
sure
que tienen
that
en estas comunidades
in
y el
that way
país en
we will
general,
not only
sino que
comply
estamos
with the
seguros que
needs of these
podrán ser
communities and the country in
actividades
general,
y
but
formas
this
de
will be
respuesta de justicia que
activities
se
and
podrán
ways of
también
responding and bringing
repetir y que
justice to
podremos
people
compartir
that
a
will
nivel internacional.
could be replicated
Yo creo que ya se me acabó
at
el
an
tiempo, me faltaría
international
una
level.
de las tres,
I don't
pero
know
no
if
sé si
I'm
Sam
out
me
of time.
permite
I'm still missing
2
one of the
minutos
three. I
para
don't know if
contarles la
Sam
última.
can
Ya,
give me
yo sé que
2
ya
more
estoy
minutes.
en el siguiente las preguntas. Perfecto, muchas gracias.
Okay, during
Estoy
the
aquí
next
para
session.
responder lo
So
que ustedes consideren y
thank you
para,
very
claro,
much. I'm
profundizar
here willing to
en
answer
estas
anything that you
experiencias.
would
Gracias
like
de nuevo por la
and to
invitación.
expand
Un saludo
knowledge
muy,
on
muy
these
afectuoso
experiences.
desde Colombia.
Thank you very much for having us, and I say hi to you from Colombia.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for what you have shared, and let's reserve some time to talk more. But I pick out 3 things that you've already said that are important in trying to make these community justice systems work. One is your experience with and the question of coordination. How do you make sure that you coordinate amongst the different actors that are relevant when it comes to community justice? You briefly mentioned it, but it seems quite important, the issue of resources, the fact that, you know, a normal Ministry of Justice can't immediately fund everything that is needed to expand these services. So some form of support there is useful. And you come back to a same point that was made by Meg, the importance of expanding the legal ecosystem. And that seems to be something important as well. So let's hold on to that. I'm quickly looking to see if there are any specific questions. Well, let me, if you don't mind, Your Excellency, then move to two honorable judges who are with us and ask them to respond, to reflect on what you've said. And then after that, there will be room for a little more discussion. We have two great experts, as I said before, and I'd like to kick it off with Justice Ngugi from Kenya, who leads the alternative justice system effort in that country. Justice Ngugi, you have the floor.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to Sam and everyone on the platform. I am quite honored to be here. It was fascinating to listen to the first three presentations. I'm going to keep my remarks fairly short because I'm actually very excited at the discussion and the questions and comments that will come after this presentation. So I'll try and keep it very, very, very short. I just wanted to say that in Kenya, we, I guess luckily for us, we have interpreted our constitution as requiring us to mainstream people-centered community justice systems as part of our legal systems. That's because in our constitution, there is a clause that that requires the judiciary to promote alternative justice systems. For us, we have interpreted that to mean that the judiciary must, of necessity, promote community justice systems. So what the Kenyan judiciary did was to form a task force to unbundle what that means, what the constitutional commandment to promote alternative justice systems or community justice systems means. The effect of that was, the outcome of that was the national policy on alternative justice systems. I was privileged to chair the task force that came up with that policy. And in essence, what that policy does is it unbundles that clause of the Constitution, and then it lays out very broad principles which we think the Constitution requires us to use based on human rights principles, basically, to promote alternative justice systems, including the right to access to justice. From the national alternative justice systems, we come to what alternative justice systems recommends, among other things, is bespoke local models, really at the county level and downrise to the local level on alternative justice systems, which means each a local area is supposed to map out what community justice systems look like in that community, and then decide using what we are calling the MAGS principles. MAGS is mainstreaming those which are working well, accelerating those which are working well, and providing guideline support, including transformation of those which might need to be brought up to speed in terms of the constitutional minimums. And this, the way the policy is written is that now this task is given to the presiding judges at the local level, at the local community level. So then what that does, it aggrandizes and liberalizes ways of ensuring these community justice systems are progressing well. For us to do this, it meant, among other things, it requires us to reconceive the role and image of a judge in the justice system. If some says that it's a 50% problem, and we think he's right, it's a 50% problem. There are 50% of justice seekers who have no access to justice. We think that is a problem for the judiciary. That is not just a problem for the justice seekers. It's something that we should be concerned. So it should be a problem for the presiding judge in a local area, which means the presiding judge in the local area must be able to determine, one, what are the percentage of cases that he is deciding, that he is arbitrating on a day-to-day basis? What is the percentage of cases that are being decided in the community justice system? And three, what is the percentage of cases which are, so to speak, justice gap, constitute justice gap? Then it means that that local presiding judge has three roles. In his role as an arbiter of the cases that are before her, that presiding judge, of course, must adhere to all the principles and the oath of office. But secondly, in that role, that judge must channel the cases that should be optimally be resolved elsewhere to those other channels, meaning community justice systems. And then secondly, for those cases that are being resolved elsewhere, this means that this judge has a role to map out what are these cases that are being decided elsewhere. Then that judge has different roles. The role is not now to channel them back to court. The role is to ensure that they are being decided in those spaces, but they are being decided in ways that are constitutionally compliant and in ways that adhere to the minimum human rights standards. That means that that judge then must put in place pedagogical means that will ensure that there is an engagement that ensures that the quality of justice received in those spaces meets the constitutional minimum. And that is in his space. That's the second role. That means that judge must play the role of a connector of justice, must play the role of producing champions of justice, must play the role of facilitating justice dialogues in that community with a view to improving the quality of justice that is being offered in those spaces, while at the same time respecting those community justice mechanisms and protecting those community justice mechanisms against third parties that might be harming them. And then lastly, for the justice gap, for those who have no access to justice, that presiding judge also now has a role to address that justice problem. It is not just a problem for the justice minister, at least as we conceive it in Kenya, because in Kenya, we look at the constitution as having given the monopoly of administration of justice to the judiciary. That means you must care about the cases that come before you, as well as the cases that do not come before you, because that monopoly of justice has been given to us. That means then we must discover where that justice gap is, and then find means of giving access to justice to those who have no access to justice now. That means going to the community, finding out what are the kinds of cases that are not seeing the light of justice, and then engaging now in your capacity, not as an arbiter, but in your capacity as a facilitator of justice, in your capacity as a promoter of justice champions, and in your capacity as connectors of justice champions, to create those bespoke mechanisms at the local level, which will now address the justice gap. We think that is the only sustainable way of addressing the justice gap. It is sustainable both in terms of cost effectiveness, but it's also sustainable in terms of acceptability, because these are systems that have been shown to work since time immemorial. These are systems that are working, and if it is not broken, then we do not need to fix it. What we need to worry about now are these other barriers towards bringing this to life? These artificial barriers, including within the justice system as well as within the legal system. I think I'll stop there because I see we are very many. I'll stop there. I think I've put enough on the table. We can discuss during the discussion time. Thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you very much, Justice Ngugi. And there is starting to be a bit of a tsunami of questions. So that's really good. Before we get to those questions, I would now like to give the floor to Justice Ogun Fuwara of Ogun State Court in Nigeria to share the experience from Nigeria. Justice, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Sam, and thank you once again for having me here. Well, we are a country of over 200 million people, or 250, with about 250 indigenous tribes and as many languages. So we have a major challenge. Let me start like this. When I was setting out, there are times that I ask myself this question. I constantly ask myself, have I affected my society positively? And have I affected as many people as I would like to as a lawyer when starting out? Well, I would say that going back over the years, there are only 2 times that I can say that I have. And this was actually when I was a lawyer and I worked in the Ministry of Justice then. First as Administrator General and Public Trustee, dealing with people who come in respect of the estates of their of deceased people. So I had to interact with a lot of people. The second time was when we were setting up the Ogun State Citizens' Rights Department. I was pioneer director then. This was about 20 years ago. Now, what we were doing then basically was community justice, community-based justice. People would just come in, would try and sort out their problems. They would be very happy, and they would write letters of letters of appreciation to us. Those letters, they would have about 15 kind of letters. Then I became a judge, and I found out that it was only in respect of the cases before me that I could really do something about. And now, if I tell you the figures in Nigeria it would show that we have no other way to go but community justice system. For example, as at 2021, our Supreme Court had 15,000 pending appeals and applications. And we only had the full complement of 21 justices sworn in late February 2024. As at 2022, our Court of Appeal had 33,644 pending appeals. In our Ogun State, 3,693 matters were filed last year. Only 1,054 matters are still pending. Totally, when we look at the overview of the matters that we had throughout last year, we had about 8,515, 8,621 were disposed of, and 1,378 were still pending. Now, we have no other choice but to go the way of community justice services. But the good thing there is that, and then when you look at which kind of problems do we have, because it is also material, we found out that basically these were a justice needs and satisfaction study was done in last year of 6,573 Nigerians, and found out that the problems, basically the common legal problems encountered include disputes with neighbors, domestic violence, land disputes, crime and housing problems. Now, the challenge here is that all of this, because we are a federation, a Federal Republic of Nigeria, we have the exclusive list and the residual. Most of these come under the residual list. So it means that it is the states within the federation that can effectively deal with this. Now, like I've said, and then in 2021, when HiiL first came and did its Justice Transformation Lab, we found out that these also were the problems that were said that we faced also. Now, what did we do in the judiciary of Ogun State? Which is why I said for Nigeria, when you're going to scale, it still must start from each state because like I said, the challenges, the problems are local. And then we have, like I said, 250 tribes scattered all over Nigeria. So it has to start from each state. It cannot come from the center. It has to start from the state. Well, happily, the Ogun State Judiciary, what did we do when we saw the statistics? Our Chief Judge, in collaboration with the Ministry of Justice, they, amongst other things, did a small claims court. Then we had prison courts. Instead of defendants going to court, we took the court to the prisons so that magistrates will sit there. Then we had an Ogun Public Interest Law Partnership that made sure that lawyers were put in police stations, because we found out that there were problems with the police too, so that those who were arrested had access to lawyers straight. Now, what we found out too basically is that, well, like we say, what we try to do is to go the way of ADR, which we all know, but we have coined it to mean not alternative dispute resolution, but African dispute resolution, because we believe that before we adopted the English system of justice, we had our own system of justice, which was community-based invariably. And our courts also recognize this, that because we call them a form of customary arbitration. But despite this, we still have challenges. But like I've said, the building blocks are already there for us. The building blocks are there. For example, the local chiefs, the obas, they still have their courts where people still go to when they seek justice. For example, two neighbors, they go to the oba's palace. They don't need to go to the formal court system. It is sorted out there. But with this large population, we now have what I would call community development associations. We already have, that's why I said we have building blocks in Nigeria, in Ogun State. We have community development associations. So what the best way for us to go is to have, maybe from these communities, have government. And when I say government here, I mean because it must be driven from the executive arm rather than from the judiciary, but with the judiciary at the back end. I would explain this. What I'm trying to say is that our system of justice, the formal justice system, the judge or the judiciary in Nigeria is basically one that still sort of stands aloof. But for example, the ADR that we talked about, we have 5 multi-door courthouses in Ogun State alone. So what we do is when people go to these multi-door courthouses, where whichever form, arbitration, conciliation, mediation, when they go, they deal with their dispute by themselves. and they still bring it up, they still bring it to the court. I am an ADR judge as well. So I just sign the judgments to give effect to it so that it can be enforced if one of the parties fail to do it. Now, when I said we have building blocks, the way I feel we can go is that for like I said, the community development associations, my take on it is because they're already there. When people go from their communities, their first point of contact when they belong to these community development associations is to go there if anything happens in the neighborhood. And then I've had instances where, even in cases before me, that their first port of call is always to their CDAs or community development association. So my take on this is that what we just need to do, what government needs to do, is to ask from each, maybe take a member or 2 members from each community development association and train them the ADR way, so that they can, in their respective communities, be the ones, they will be formally trained, they will be the ones that they would go to, because they invariably go there first. That's their first port of call when they are doing community justice. So, and then when they go there, they will just bring it. I'll soon round up in about 2 minutes, in another minute. So they will go there and then bring up, then they will go via the OMDC, the multi-door courthouses, so that you'd have such judgments or such agreements or whatever they have there, have it registered so that it can come to court, so that it can also be signed. Because like I've said, these are already building blocks that we have. It's just that the challenges, like we outlined, highlighted as finance, and then interagency collaboration, and then interagency collaboration, finance, legislative reforms, and then the communities themselves. So it is for us, if there is a political will for government, I believe that it's easily scalable and we can integrate it easily, because like I said, we already have the building blocks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I have a question here. Let me just round up. The small claims courts are presided over by our magistrates in Ogun State. They deal with claims that are 500,000, about 500,000 naira. That's what we do. I'm available for all of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice Ogunfohala, for this, for adding the Nigerian experience. And indeed, the scale at which things need to happen in Nigeria is sometimes mind-boggling for somebody like me, who comes from a simple country of only 18 million people. Okay, I'd like to move on with the 2 last speakers and then have enough time for a discussion, because interesting stuff is happening. But let's listen to the different speakers, and then I will bring it all together. I'm happy to see what's happening on the chat. I see questions on regulatory models, on skills, on funding, on multi-actor collaboration. So we'll get to that in a minute. We've heard from 2 people from the judiciary. We've heard from a minister, and we've heard from 2 people from international organizations, the UN and the OECD. Now we go to 2 people who are very much on the ground doing this kind of work. They have good examples of the integration of community justice mechanisms linked to the formal system. I'd like to start with you, Annette, to give you the floor to share the experience from Kenya. Annette, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm really happy to be here today just to share our experience. I think I'll start by saying that we as, I work in an organization that's called Kituo cha Sheria. It's the oldest organization in East Central and the Horn of Africa. And we as an institution have been applying the legal empowerment approach in our programming, just as Professor Meg had spoken about, where there's a need to place the power of the law in the hands of the people. And so what we've been doing is to ensure that the people know the law, they're able to use the law, and they also shape the law. And what informed the use of this approach is the question of sustainability, accessibility, as well as the scalability and using law to transform the lives of individuals and also of communities as a whole. So for a long time, since Kituo was established in 1973, we have adopted the use of community-based solutions for justice. And this began just by first training community-based paralegals, mainly those that are working within informal settlements, but also in the most marginalized areas in Kenya. And we just started with one county, and over time this has scaled up to around 27 counties out of 47 that we have across the country. And initially, before, we did not really have a legislative or a policy framework. But we are happy that in 2010, when we had a new constitution that Justice Ngugi spoke about, there was a clear indication in the constitution of the need to integrate traditional justice mechanisms within the formal justice mechanism. So the constitution, including the national policy that followed thereafter, has really helped us to kind of deepen the work that we have already been doing around community justice, and also have a sense of a place to anchor this work and collaborate even more closely with the judiciary, for example, and other state institutions. So in terms of the impact, I would say a lot of our community justice actors have helped in enhancing peace and reconciliation, for example, within humanitarian settings such as refugee camps, also within areas where we've had post-election related kind of violence, really just to bring some sense of accountability within the communities. And we've seen that these community-centered approaches have really helped to build a sense of cohesion, even during very difficult post-election periods where there is conflict that is triggered by the electoral violence. And also we've had a lot of our community paralegals in informal settlements provide paralegal support so that the communities there that are really the poorest within our country do not necessarily have to seek legal assistance from private lawyers, but they can get first aid legal assistance from community paralegals, and where there are very technical issues, then they would refer them to us as legal practitioners for further support. So I would say that we have seen through the existence of the policy, the national policy on alternative justice systems, that there's been a lot of collaboration. In fact, I would say that the implementation of that policy is a collaborative effort of many actors within the justice system. And what I would say that this comes in terms of looking into the development of county action plans, also the training of communities, sensitizing them on how these community justice systems are anchored to the formal system, but also just to integrate human rights-based approaches, even within the structures that already exist. Because we as a judge from Nigeria just said that we already, as African states, already had customary structures that would resolve certain disputes. And so we've seen that the use of, or rather implementing this policy has also helped to integrate human rights standards within already existing customary structures. The other also issue is really just to the question around financing for community justice. And so a lot of the financing, unfortunately, is not channeled specifically for community justice actors. And what we've been trying to do is to support financing for this kind of work And this is also through the UN agencies that are in the justice sector. But again, at the same time, as civil society actors, is to challenge government itself to set aside funding specifically for people-centered justice. And looking, when I talk of people-centered justice, is really to invest in communities as opposed to infrastructural development around justice issues. The other thing I'd like to talk about also is how we've been able to tap into existing community structures. So as I said, we do have certain communities that have already traditional structures, and different ethnic groups have their own structures. And looking at how these can be exploited, if I may use that term, in a way that then kind of assists in scaling community justice solutions. And where there are none is then to look at how we can organize the communities themselves. And as HiiL, we work with community groups. So the community groups come together as justice actors. They form community-based organizations, and our collaboration actually is with these particular groups. But even then, we do not want to take center stage at civil society actors, but just work as allies, where we are mentoring the community groups. We are providing them with the support that they need, but they actually are the ones who are leading the process in terms of community justice solutions. For those that we do train, we have also linked them formally to existing structures within the judiciary, such as the court users committees, which is a multi-stakeholder institution within the judiciary of Kenya that allows for other actors to participate in contributing towards administration of justice. So what we would do is then to find, formally introduce our community paralegals to these court users committees. And we do have a number of our community-based paralegals that sit within the court users committees, and they're able to really give direct information from their community perspective to the formal justice system and contribute towards that. I think one other thing that is important really to scale community justice solutions is finding anchorage within the law or policy. And I think for us, it has been easier because of having many pieces of legislation that allow for this. And one of the challenges would give to governments is to find whether it's to develop a law or a policy or a plan that specifically allows for integration. I think this would make it easier to do that. But then in terms of challenges, one has been the question of recognition of the community justice actors. And we've had a number of issues around this, where community justice actors or practitioners are not recognized formally, or where they are, that is in legislation. And so by having no formal recognition, then it does pose a challenge in terms of how they're able to execute their tasks. And so we have within, not just in Kenya, but also in some other African states, is to find ways of having formal recognition, whether it's through the law or through policy, of community justice actors. And through this, then they can also receive state financing. Another challenge is how do we then build trust? Because for integration, there must be trust between the state and its citizenry. So where there's a lack of trust, then we have seen challenges where people do not feel at ease bringing their justice problems to a state entity. And one of the things, I think, by opening up of the judiciary, for example, and also looking at the trends within our own judiciary, I would say the community has a greater sense of trust within the judiciary as opposed to the other two arms of government. But then I think it's important that even as we are scaling up, is to find ways of enhancing the level of trust between the state and its people. The last comment I'd like to speak about is, even as you look at integration, is to be aware of the dangers and the potential pitfalls around integration, whereby we know the state can actually, take over the space for community actors. So I think even as we integrate, there should be a sense of independence and autonomy, still being left to community justice actors, so that they're able to still operate independently from the state where they want to do so, and still have the option of linking to the state through a formal process. And I think our policy around AJS really has a very good framework on that, where it recognizes the autonomous system that is not necessarily linked to the state and can operate independently. But I think just being aware of that potential pitfall is important as we think around scaling up community justice solutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annette, for this elaborate description of some of the things you've come across. I'd now like to turn to you, Miliki Mekura, to share some of the experience from Ethiopia, and then we'll get into a debate and some of the questions. Miliki, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you very much to give me the chance to share the practice of customary courts in Oromia region of Ethiopia. As some of you may know, Ethiopia follows a federal system of government, and Oromia is one of the 12 federating units in the Republic of Ethiopia. Oromia is the homeland of the Oromo people that is estimated to be over 40 million. And the Oromo people is known by Gada system, which is a traditional system of governance developed from the indigenous knowledge gained by community experience over generations. And Gada is inscribed on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity by UNESCO in 2016. And the Gada system also deals with the issues of conflict resolution. So the practice of customary courts in Oromia region bases itself in the Gada system. This was given recognition in the constitution, in the 1995 Constitution of Ethiopia. Also the regional constitution of Oromia regional state gives recognition that customary courts and religious courts may operate in the region or in Ethiopia. Following this, the customary court proclamation was enacted by Oromia regional state in 2021. Also some other subsidiary laws to the proclamation were issued in the same year. A regulation and a directive were issued to put effect to the customary courts proclamation. And based on these regulations, customary courts were established in Oromia, and some were given recognitions. According to the proclamation, a customary or social institution that was already working and resolving disputes based on Oromo customary rules and values shall be given recognition as a customary court. And in places where we don't have such customary or social institutions working in resolving disputes, we shall establish such customary courts that work based on the customary laws of the Oromo people. So accordingly, until June 2023, a total number of first instance customary courts in Oromia, established in Oromia, were 6,199, and from which 142 are those given recognition, while some are newly established ones. And also there are appellate customary court structure, and this is number 310 appellate customary courts in Oromia, of which 22 are those given recognition pursuant to the customary courts proclamation. According to the laws, regulations, and customary court proclamation, the customary courts, both the first instance and the appellate customary courts, are given the jurisdiction to entertain any civil case. They can entertain family cases, and also they can entertain any civil matters. Also, they can entertain petty offenses and crimes punishable upon complaints. But the proclamation clearly provides that the customary courts may assume jurisdiction only if a defendant has given his or her consent. So it is a consent-based jurisdiction. The customary courts have consent-based jurisdictions in Oromia. So the customary courts shall have power to reconcile the parties and also to determine compensations in any criminal cases beyond the petty offenses and crimes punishable upon complaint. But in serious crimes, this does not prohibit the public prosecutor from bringing cases before regular courts. The law the customary courts applies a customary law that is compatible with the Constitution, with the public morality, and with the natural justice. So the elders of the customary courts are not bound by the substantive laws and the procedural rules enacted by the legislature. They simply use the customary courts, which are indigenous laws of the Oromo people. In practice, these customary courts had great contributions with regard to ensuring the accessibility of justice in the region, because there is no court fees to obtain redress before the customary courts. The customary courts use Oromo language as their working language. That means no language barriers for the people of the region. This also is very important in ensuring accessibility of justice to the local people. The easiness of the procedures to access the courts and the tribunals for all sections of the society, because they use the customary laws. They are not required to employ laws enacted by the legislature. So everyone now knows the laws, the local law, the indigenous law. So the procedures they use is very simple for the local people to use. So they are very important in ensuring the accessibility of justice with regard also. The other very important point with regard to the accessibility of customary courts in Oromia is that they are constituted at lowest administration unit. So they have physical accessibility. They are also accessible to those who have no evidence to prove their allegations. As you all know, the formal court can accept one's case only when there is evidence that is helpful to prove the allegations. But the customary courts in Oromia have a system of oaths, which is very important to dig the truth or to serve the justice of those, especially for those who does not have evidence or witnesses to prove their allegations. because the O system, the Oromo people have O system in its culture, and everyone fears to take these oaths when it does not have the reality or the truth or justice. So they simply serve justice by employing the O system, which bases itself in the culture of the society. When we see the cases processed in Oromia customary courts, as I was saying, the customary courts proclamation was enacted in 2021. The customary courts were being established and given recognition since 2021, and they has commenced their work. They have commenced their work in 2022. In 1 year, from July 2022 to June 2023, the first instance customary courts have processed 376 and 60 cases. And among these, 86.8% of these cases were disposed. And the appellate customary court's performance in 1 year was 15,540 cases. They were processing this amount of cases in 1 year, and more than 86% of these cases were disposed. So the regular courts are entertaining around 660 cases, which means the customary courts are processing cases, which is 50% of the cases being entertained by formal courts in Oromia region of Ethiopia. And
could I ask you to wind up in the interest of time? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we want to have some time for the questions.
Okay, thank you. So the cases from formal state courts were highly reduced since the customary courts have commenced their works. That has showed this. And the customary courts have a good relationship with the formal courts. The formal courts review decisions of the customary courts. The mode of coexistence or operation between customary courts and formal courts is cooperative. The customary courts are not subordinated to the formal courts, and the decisions of Oromia customary courts are not filed as a fresh suit to formal state courts. And also the decisions of the first instance customary courts are appealable only to the appellate customary courts. The only time we take appeal to the regular courts is that when the decisions of the customary courts or where the law the customary courts have applied undermines the right to equality of the disputing parties, and when it overlooks the right to be heard or other when it violates human rights and basic freedoms of the citizens. So they have such kind of cooperative relationship with the regular courts too.
Yep.
And the only point I want to add is the source of income of the customary courts is from the public. The customary courts are social institutions. They are not government institutions, so they don't have their budget allocated to them by government, as is in the case in the formal state courts. So their sources are contributions collected from citizens in 3 different ways. The first thing, mechanism to collect income of customary courts is that every household is expected to make contributions on yearly basis, and also the customary courts get their income from fine they impose. The customary courts are allowed by the proclamation to impose fine on a person who fails to comply with the customary procedure, customary courts, on a person who failed to appear without cause before this customary courts. So the fine collected in such way will make up the income of the customary courts. Thank you for hearing.
Thank you, Milky. Especially that last bit is interesting about the funding. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I'd now like to turn to the questions, and there's been a lot, but let me start with one. And Minister Gaitan, maybe I could ask you that first question. It has to do with the enabling environment. And one of the questions in the chat was, as a Ministry of Justice, what kind of laws, and do you have examples of laws that you adopt that make it easier for community justice systems to function? And maybe a bit of a hot potato connected with that was a question of, in regulating this this larger ecosystem of justice provision, what experience, if any, do you have with dealing with the Bar Association and legal practitioners who do not want to give up their privileged position in providing justice? Over to you.
Sí, tenemos una ley de
Yes.
tenemos varias leyes.
We have
Tenemos
several
una
laws.
norma constitucional que es la
And
que
we also
abrió
have
todo
a
el panorama
constitutional
del
mandate. That's the one that
reconocimiento no
expanded
solo
all of
de la
this.
jurisdicción ordinaria y del Poder
So
Judicial,
not
sino
only the
también
recognition of the
de
ordinary jurisdiction
particulares que vienen
and the
investidos de función de
judiciary,
justicia.
but
Entonces, por
also
ejemplo, tenemos
private
jueces de
citizens,
paz,
or
tenemos también
rather
conciliadores, tanto en
judicial
derecho como en
functionaries. So we
equidad,
have
y
peace
todo esto
judges,
está claramente
conciliators,
reglamentado. Tenemos un
and it is all
estatuto que
duly
regula los
regulated. We
temas
have
de
a statute
conciliación
that
en equidad y en
regulates
derecho.
everything that's
Tenemos también la ley
related
de
this
coordinación
arbitration.
entre la
We also
justicia
have
ordinaria
a
y las
coordination
justicias
law between the
propias.
ordinary justice
Tenemos
and the
otros,
other
otros
justice
sistemas normativos
systems.
que
We
nos
also
permiten
have
la
other
colaboración entre
regulatory
los
systems that allow
particulares
for
al servicio
coordination
de
between
medios
private
alternativos de solución de
citizens
conflictos.
that work
En
in this
relación
alternative conflict
al último
resolution
punto de tu
systems. And
pregunta,
that related to the second part of your question.
allí, digamos, en Colombia no existen asociaciones de abogados.
Colombia doesn't have a
Digamos
bar
que nosotros como
association.
abogados estamos y
Let's
pertenecemos y
say,
estamos
as
dentro de la rama
lawyers,
judicial.
we're all
Nos
part of the
inscribimos en un registro
judiciary.
general, pero
We
no hay colegios de
become part of a
abogados.
record,
A
but we don't have
diferencia
this
de
bar
los diferentes
association
modelos de
different
los que hablaron
from
los
other
honorables jueces
models that
y
were
las
discussed here
personas de la
today
sociedad civil que también intervinieron en el panel anterior.
by our
En
judges and
Colombia no estamos
civil society
organizados,
representatives.
pero
Colombia,
eso no
there's
impide
no
que,
bar association,
digamos,
but
los
that
abogados en una
doesn't
primera fase,
prevent
antes del grado, tenemos una
lawyers
especie de servicio social.
before
Es un servicio social
graduating. We
obligatorio
have
a
some
través del
sort of
cual todos los abogados
social
tienen que
service that
pasar
is
por las
mandatory.
diferentes áreas del
Every
derecho y
law
allí lo que
professional
estamos haciendo
has
desde
to
el ministerio
go through the
es
different
brindando
areas or
líneas
branches of law.
específicas
And
para
what
que
we're doing
puedan
from the ministry is
claramente
each law
trabajar
professional
no solamente en la justicia
should
formal,
know
sino
how
que
to
haya
work
la
not
posibilidad de que
only
se
in the
involucren
formal
también
justice
como
system, but
conciliadores,
also for them
pero
to
lo más
have the
importante,
possibility of
que
become
sean también
conciliators,
personal de apoyo para el
but
trabajo de
also
los
to
jueces,
become
porque en muchas oportunidades
support
vemos
personnel
que
for the work
la
of judges,
justicia
because
ordinaria
oftentimes what
se
we see is
demora,
that
es lenta,
ordinary
tiene una gran
justice is very
congestión.
slow,
Entonces, lo que nosotros estamos
it's
intentando es que a través de
has
lineamientos que
bottlenecks
hace,
as well.
en
So what
este
we're
caso, el
trying is that
Ministerio de
through
Justicia,
guidelines from the
estos
Ministry of
futuros
Justice, in this case,
profesionales y
this
abogados
future
puedan
law
involucrarse a través de
professionals
clínicas
and
jurídicas,
attorneys
a
can get
través de
involved
otros
through
medios que son como de soporte para la
legal
actividad judicial
consultancy and
antes
other
de la
means
graduación.
that
Eso además,
support
luego cuando ellos se gradúan,
judicial activity
les puede
before
puntuar
graduating,
como
and then after they
son
graduate
como algunos
can
puntos
give
adicionales en
them
su hoja de
extra
vida
points
o
in their
práctica que no es
curriculum
igual a la práctica que allá hace
as
siendo
a
profesional, pero que es
professional
muy importante y
experience
lleva
that
a
well,
que también
it's
esos
different from
estudiantes
regular professional experience, but it is very important for the students, many of which come from private universities, to know about the realities that they will be working in. This, of course, doesn't mean that these attorneys, if they want to continue through this conflict resolution route, they cannot go to other specialties. So those would be the two examples. Or the third one with the judicial policy. We also have a very important network called Weaving Justice here. And in this Weaving Justice network, we involve the different types of knowledge so that future attorneys, law professors, and universities can submit new resolution alternatives for those regions and territories.
Thank you very much, Minister, for this excellent response. Maybe I could ask the other panel members, Justice Ogunofora, Justice Ngugi, Milky, and Annette, just to open your camera, because then we can have a discussion. I could ask a general question, and you can respond if there are any. Let's have you all there. And Meg, feel free to join, but remember that I hope we can count on you a little bit also on some of the closing observations that you may have. Another question, Judge Ngugi, you raised this very interesting these different roles that you are assigning to judges. If I'm not mistaken, the judge is the arbiter, the judge is the connector, and I would say the judge as a system improver, system monitor. How do you do that with, judges are, as we know them, are generally overloaded, underfunded, working hard on the case law. Then you give them these extra functions. How does that work? Maybe I could ask you that question, and then afterwards ask Judge Ogunfora to maybe reflect on whether that would work in Nigeria and in other places. Justice Ngugi, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Sam. So first of all, I have to say that I really enjoyed the Deputy Minister's remarks from Colombia, and I feel like Colombia is almost on the same trajectory as Kenya, and I'm hoping we will be in a conference soon organized by Sam, where we can talk more about that stuff. In short, let me say this, Sam. I think the answer is in challenging judges and ministries of justice to think about justice seriously. Justice for all, seriously. If we wear that lens, then we ask judges to think about them as being ministers of justice, because every judge, in reality, are ministers of justice. And then challenging them to think about what does it mean when the Constitution says you have been given the monopoly for administration of justice. What does it really mean? And we challenge them pedagogically to think through that, because it does not mean that you're only responsible for, in the case of Kenya, only 17% of cases that actually come before you. It means that you're responsible for 100% of cases. And if you're responsible for 100% of cases, then you must at least think through what is happening to the other, in Kenya, 64% of cases that are going elsewhere. And in Kenya, through the report that you yourself, Sam, did with your team, 19% of cases that never see the light of day. We challenge them to think that the Constitution requires them to know about the quality of justice that is being given elsewhere. We challenge them to know that they must think about the justice gap. It is part of their responsibility as judges. When they think that way, then we also scare them by also telling them, frankly, you don't want that 64% of cases now to come to you as judges, because you can still deal with the 17% of cases that are coming before you. That's why we have backlog. And neither do you want the 19% of the justice gap to come to you, because you still can't deal with the backlog you have. So you just want to create an enabling environment where those people-centered justice systems actually operate. The only way to do that is by you playing these other roles beyond your role as an arbiter. That is a role that is constitutionally required. We tell them it is constitutionally required, and therefore you just have to wear it. But beyond being constitutionally required, it is a role that if you want to be to have a meaningful impact as a judge, beyond the retail arbitration of the cases that come before you. And in those cases that come before you, we remind them, you just decide, you don't resolve. A land case that comes before you as a judge, you just decide who has won and who has lost. You don't resolve anything. You don't resolve the root causes of those cases of the dispute that before you. And so you really do very little. You are just a salve. You are just sort of, if you want to really be to have meaningful impact in the society, you have to travel beyond the 19% of cases, 17% in our case, of cases that actually come before you. So we ask them, do you want to be meaningful? Do you want to have an impact in society? If the answer is yes, then you must play this other role. Thank you, Sam.
Wow, Justice Ngugi, that's amazing. How does that work in Nigeria, Justice Ogunfora?
Well, you know that, Sam, thank you. Once again, you know that I ask myself periodically, have I been able to positively but greatly affect a number of people? I said no, which is the point Justice Ngugi just made. That is, as a judicial officer, that have I affected, because like he said, it's only as regards the cases that come before you that you get to make a decision, which is why, like I said, that is why we need community justice system. Like I said, there are 250,000 indigenous tribes in Nigeria. So we have to, you see, it's something that, and we have 36 states. So each state has to go it alone in its own way. That's why I've said, but for us, it is, you cannot, I don't know how they'll do it in Kenya, but in Nigeria, you cannot take on that job as well to go outside your constitutional duty. The best we can do, like our Chief Judge has done, is to create an enabling environment. What she has done is that she has created multi-door courthouses where there are mediation centers, arbitration centers. So my take now is that, like I said earlier, we have a lot of community development associations. And like you know, we have OBAs, all of this, before they already do customary arbitration, which is what we call them. So it is the ones that aren't satisfied with the customary arbitrations that come to court. So my thinking now is that what we can do, if it has to move from the executive arm of government, because it means once they have the willpower, they already have the building blocks are there. Just take from each community development associations, like I said, take maybe one person each, train them as ADR, train them in mediation, conciliation, then let them go back to their respective communities. Let those who are aggrieved, let them go through them, and then at the back end of it, facilitate it through the OMDC, the multi-door courthouses, so that the decisions or the agreements that they get there, they get endorsed by court so that they can be judicially enforced. That, I believe, and you know that it is still people-centered, because it is people from their community that have reached that decision for them. It is just that we don't want that, whichever percentage, we don't want them coming into the court system again. We simply just want to endorse and then have them do that. But of course, like I've said, the building blocks are there. It's just to do a policy. We must refashion a policy to the building blocks, then do a structure to take in everybody. For example, there is even a Ministry of Community Development that will pretend these CDAs. So it's easy to go through them. And then I hear that one individual has even done an application that has all of the community development associations in Ogun State. So that's why there must be collaboration, there must be integration, all of this. But what I know is that it's simply workable, so that maybe in another 10 years, 15 years, when I ask myself that question again, that have I contributed positively and greatly? And then I see all of this community justice system working, I would say, yes, I was part of that. I was one of those who made that to happen. Thank you once again, sir.
Great, thank you very much, Justice. It seems to me that we're kind of closing in on at least three core elements of scaling. One, Annette, you mentioned that using existing structures, and everybody's referring to that. There's a lot more, happening in those communities than we think. The second is what Kenya seems to be pioneering, but others as well, is using the judges as a way to scale by defining their role as enablers of scale and as enablers of knowledge. And the third one, Minister, you referred to that, is the importance of setting policies and laws that make it possible. Let me now, maybe if I could, turn to the question that you ended with a really interesting example. Miliki, is the funding question, and this is maybe a question to you, Miliki, but also to you, Minister, and Annette maybe as well. How do you fund this? So we have one example now of community contributions, but it is a challenge, right, to get it funded. Miliki, could you say a few things about the experience of working with the community contributions? And then maybe Annette, and then we allow the Minister to reflect as the final person on this core issue of funding. Miliki, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sam. In our practice, the law clearly provides that there should be community contributions. It may be in cash or in kind, on yearly basis. So every household is required to make contributions. For example, in most of the local community jurisdictions, it is 200 per year, which means it is very minimal. I think it means less than $10. So every household contributes this much in cash, and also the community provides all things necessary, maybe in kind. For example, while building the offices of the customary courts. So there are contributions in kind, like building, like working, contributing the shelters while making the shelters. The community also on yearly basis is duty bound to contribute some amount of money, and I think the community is very happy to contribute for customary courts because the customary courts are very important to the community in reducing their costs, the costs that they may incur while using the judiciary or formal justice. So everyone is willing in our practice to contribute what is required of him.
Very interesting. It's something that is quite pioneering as far as I can assess. Can I turn to you? Any thoughts on this one, the financing?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So for us, our community justice actors are normally do all their work on voluntary basis. So I would say it's an in-kind support. But we sometimes do get funding from some of our development partners to support mainly the operational costs that they may require to carry out this kind of work. And it goes to around, for each of our community centers, it would go to around $2,000 per year. So it really just caters for, their transport costs moving around and maybe stationary and other costs that they may require. But definitely, I would say there is a funding challenge when it comes to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Annette. Minister, any thoughts from your end on funding these kinds of community initiatives?
Sí, pues nosotros tenemos,
Yes,
como
well,
señalaba Annette,
as
tenemos
Annette
también
mentioned,
mucho
we
trabajo
also
comunitario, es decir, se
have a
incentiva
lot of
y es
community
un
work.
reclamo,
This is
por ejemplo,
something that is
nosotros tenemos en
promoted.
Equidad,
And
porque pues nosotros
for instance,
solamente
our
lo que hacemos es darles
conciliators,
como,
our equality conciliators,
digamos, beneficios para
ask us
acceso a
about this
créditos de
because
vivienda,
we
créditos de
try to
estudio,
give them
pero
benefits
realmente estas
for
personas
credit,
son dueños
for
de entidades y
housing
pues
credit,
reciben un salario.
and education credit,
Es
but these
todo por ayuda
conciliators
comunitaria.
do not get
Esa
a
sería una de
salary.
las
This is
vías.
all made in
En lo cual,
kind.
pues, obviamente, yo también lo pienso siempre porque
This
es
would be
tanto el
one of
trabajo que
the
tienen que de verdad
paths,
deberíamos
and I
tener una
think
forma
about this
distinta de
all the
financiación.
time because
Pero
it's
digamos que
so
por ahora
their work
incentivos que
is
colaboran
so
pues en su
much
vida no solo
that
de ellos,
we
sino
should
también
have an
nosotros como familia.
initiative,
Esa es
not
una
only
de las
on a way
vías.
of cooperating, not
Otra
only
vía
for them but for
es
their families as well.
teniendo en cuenta la
Another path
infraestructura,
is
todo
to
lo que es el
take
proceso de
into account
infraestructura y el lugar
infrastructure
donde
and
se
everything
encuentran
related to it,
estas formas
the
donde
places
articulamos todas
where
las soluciones de justicia.
the
Esto
well
se
where
hace a
we
través de
articulate all
recursos
of
no
these
de la
justice
nación,
solutions. This
sino
is done
recursos
not through
territoriales. Los
national
municipios y
resources,
los
but
distritos
regional
apoyados por los
resources.
departamentos
Municipalities and
tienen la
districts
capacidad
supported by
de,
the departments
a través de sus
have the
recursos propios,
capacity
influir
through their own
y poder
resources
colaborar con lo que es
to have an
infraestructura.
influence and to
Y la
cooperate
otra
with
fuente de
everything
financiación que
related to
estamos
this
y que
infrastructure. And the other
implementamos es a través de
uh,
bancos de proyectos.
funding
Y entonces
path
en estos
that we
bancos de
have
proyectos el
implemented
ministerio
is
hace una
through
convocatoria
project
amplia
banks.
a
So what
través de la
we
cual
do is that
lo
the
que entregamos
ministry
son recursos que llegan directamente a las
has a
comunidades.
bidding process
Entonces
through
son
which we
recursos que son
deliver
obviamente del
resources
nivel
that reach
central,
these
pero
communities.
que no
These are
manejamos
resources
nosotros, sino
that
que a
come
través
from
del
the
proyecto
central
que nos
government,
presenta
but
cada
that
una de
we
las
don't handle
comunidades,
ourselves, but
independientemente cuál
through
sea
projects
su
presented by
sistema
each one
local
of
que
the
quiere
communities,
implementar, entonces
irregardless
allí
of
nosotros
their
hacemos un
system that they
giro
want to implement.
directo para que sean las
We
mismas comunidades las que puedan lograr la
disburse
sostenibilidad. Y
so
el
that
último
it's the
punto, y es
communities
en el que
themselves the
más
ones
estamos
who can
trabajando
reach
y que ha sido un poco más
sustainability.
complejo,
And the last
es
point
buscar
that is the one
cómo
that we're
hacemos
working on
también
and that perhaps
económicamente
has been
sostenible
more
las
complex
comunidades, no
is
solo en
how
justicia.
can we make
Tenemos que lograr que sean
the communities
sostenibles
financially sustainable,
alrededor de
not
un
only in
grupo
terms
de
of
actividades
justice. We need to
económicas
make
para
sure
esa
that they're
actividad, ese
sustainable in
territorio,
terms of
para que así también
economic
eso pueda
activities for
ser
that community in
verse
that
reflejado
territory
en
so
las
that that
actividades
can
de
be
justicia.
reflected on
Esas son como
justice
nuestras 4
activities. So
iniciativas,
those
pero
would be,
aún,
I'd say, our 4
insisto, sigue
initiatives.
siendo nuestro
But once
mayor
again,
desafío,
this is our greatest challenge,
porque las necesidades de
funding,
justicia
because
son muchas
the need for justice
y especialmente
is
la
we
ruralidad
have
dispersa.
multiple needs for
Nosotros
justices,
estamos
especially in
también
that
con una
related
apuesta muy
with
importante en la creación de la
rural
Fundación Agraria
populations
Rural,
that are distant.
donde
Right now,
siguiendo
we're
el ejemplo de
creating
Kenia,
a
nosotros hemos
rural
mirado muy
agricultural
atentamente,
jurisdiction
señor
and
juez,
looking very
todo lo que
closely,
ustedes
Mr.
hacen
Judge, to
en
Kenya
materia de
and what you've
jurisdicciones
done
especializadas,
in
tanto de
terms of
mujeres como agraria y
specialized
rural,
jurisdictions,
y allí nosotros
such
tenemos
as the
figura
women's
de
jurisdiction and the
facilitador,
agricultural
tenemos
and
figuras
rural. We
que
have the
llevan a unos jueces
role of
distintos.
the
No es un juez al
facilitator
que vamos a rogarle
that
justicia,
lead to
sino que es un
different
juez
types of
que va al
judges. It's
territorio,
not a
está
judge
apoyado
that
con
we
unos
come
aparatos
before
interdisciplinarios
looking for
que
justice, but it's
conocen el
a
territorio y el
judge that's
conflicto y
connected
que
to the
tienen
territory,
obviamente un
someone
rol
who
mucho
knows
más
about the
determinante
conflicts
para
and that have a more decisive role in terms of weaving new bonds and to rebuild ourselves as a country.
Thank you very much, Minister. Well, we're nearing the end of this webinar. I see broadly 4 themes, and then I will give the floor to you, Meg, for closing. But we've talked about kind of enabling environment things, laws, regulations, policies, constitutions, those kind of things that need to be in place. Knowledge, skills, how to innovate, roles, training, all those kinds of issues. The precarious issue of funding, or the challenging issue of funding. And lastly, we've had some really good exchanges about coordination, cross-sectoral collaboration, the justice sector getting out of its little silo and communicating with and working together with others as well. I will not even begin to bring this together, but Meg, what have you picked up from what you've heard?
Thank you so much, Sam. And I just first want to thank each of the participants. Each of the speakers has been incredibly eloquent and just so wonderfully concrete with your examples. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to take a moment to just say one thing that I heard from each of you. Unfortunately, this could go on forever. So I have insisted that I only take one thing, but I would like to do that because they were so wonderful. So Sam, you initially set out these 3 challenges of scale, sustainable funding, and continual quality operation, which I think really came back in each of the speakers' comments. Tatiana described how innovative justice initiatives translate into concrete outcomes that everyone can appreciate, and she gave the example of reduced recidivism rates. The first panel really focused on what justice ministries and others can do to scale people-centered justice innovations. Deputy Minister, you talked about the recognition of community justice systems and the need to ensure ordinary justice systems learn from those community justice systems. To make this possible, as you just said, support is needed. Justice Ngugi from Kenya, you spoke very eloquently about how judges are responsible not only for the cases before them, but the cases that don't come before them because they're falling into the justice gap. I think this reconstruction of how judges are responsible for that whole range of justice problems is really innovative. Justice Ogunfora of Nigeria, you spoke of this wonderful concept of African dispute resolution practices, which were displaced through colonialism and are now being reclaimed and can be scaled because they are rooted in tradition. The second panel then focused on practices for linking community justice systems with the formal justice system. Annette Mbogo from Kenya discussed how Kichwa Sharia helped to really create the model of training and deploying community justice workers. And she spoke about the collaborative effort between communities, civil society, and the judiciary that requires the creative integration of human rights standards into existing customary systems. Mikey Mikuria from Ethiopia spoke about how delivering rapid justice rooted in the culture of communities will reduce the workload of formal courts. And I think that's something that would be music to the ears of many judges. So in sum, the insights shared during the webinar are so rich that obviously they cannot be easily summarized. So I want to leave with the following 3 points that I'm taking away. First, customary or traditional systems, referred to here as African dispute resolution, but named in many other ways as well, should be recognized and given appropriate status, support, and ability and jurisdiction to construct partnerships. Second, formal justice systems and personnel have to learn from customary justice and community justice systems and should take on this different role of supporters and pathfinders. Lawyers can reimagine themselves as champions of inclusion, opening the courthouse door instead of using the bar as a dividing line. And judges have demonstrated they can take justice seriously by becoming ministers of justice, envisioning transformative roles as system improvers and connectors of community and formal systems. Scaled programs will be less expensive, more effective, and will shrink the justice gap. So that's the final point I think that you all made so effectively. I look forward to working with all of you as these efforts move forward, and you can count on my office to amplify the work you're doing and speak out on these issues. I'm super impressed and just so inspired by today's conversation. And I want to thank each of you, Justice Champions, for bringing your insights together today. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Meg. Thank you very much, Minister Gaitan, Justice Ogunfora, Justice Ngugi, Annette, Liki, everybody else who helped make this happen. We're going to try and capture this in some kind of document that will take some kind of form, easy to digest, and we'll share that with you. And that will be the foundation to take this further, because it has been amazingly rich. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. It was great to have you with us. Thank you.